What's good, y'all? We're standing in front of my mural, and today we're going to have a chat about the entire process because this is the biggest project I've ever been a part of in terms of size, time, everything. So, without further ado, let's get into it. And let me just do a quick disclaimer. It's very windy out here, and I'm using a super chopped mic, so the audio isn't beautiful. I'm sorry. We'll get there one day, though. But before we get into it, let's take a look at it. So this is the Duke substation wall mural. Just let me explain that real quick. This wall is actually one of 5 that surround an electrical substation. I'm actually under the impression that that's pretty rare, mostly because the other ones in town don't have walls. The reason this project happened is the walls became prime real estate for graffiti, and so Duke Energy collaborated with the city to bring some public art to them. Shout out to Duke. We were contacted by the city's Economic and Sustainable Development Department. When I say we, I want to mention that I actually did this mural with 2 other artists, Emily Gillespie and Diego Manansala. And as you can see, they are incredibly talented. We knocked it out the park. So with that being said, let's talk about some of the logistics. This project began with a full day orientation, and that orientation actually served a few purposes. When they briefed us on the project, we came into it, there was already general themes and almost like a prompt that was already pre-selected. There were a ton of stakeholders in this project, and one of the main ones is the neighborhood that's directly behind the substation. With those like themes and kind of like a wish list of things that they wanted to see in it, that gave us a good idea of where to go as we brainstormed. But that's not all that we did. A huge part of the day was actually doing these breakout sessions, and they allowed us to kind of get to know each other more and establish this mutual rapport and respect between each other, because if you think about it, this project started in May, so we were about to be working together for a good 6 months, and being able to find some early common ground and commit to like a sense of accountability was really important. Let's talk design. This was actually from May to August, and very, very early on, we decided that we wanted this piece to be cohesive, meaning like we wanted it to flow as one piece of art. And that was really important to us, and we all felt like we could make our individual styles and ideas come out in other ways. Now I'm going to show you all of the iterations of the design. We're going to talk about the elements, how they evolved, and what the feedback and critique process looked like. We each decided to come up with a couple concepts each. Here were my 2. I really liked the idea of a nighttime scene. I just don't think that you see it very often. It kind of offers you like a unique color palette to work with. And the story behind both of these is pretty much the same. Couple dancing on their porch, just enjoying the night. And then you've got the neighborhood cascading behind them. In both, there's a cat because they've got some famous strays over there. Now, looking at this purple one, this one was my favorite of the 2 that I came up with. I really like the color palette, and I really like the simplicity. And here's an element page that I drew, which features 2 native plants to our area. We really wanted to include that. Here's Diego's initial sketch. You can see the cat theme, the native plants remained, and I believe this is where the incorporation of actual houses from the neighborhood sprang from. Finally, here's Emily's. And we ended up going with Emily's sketch for multiple reasons, but off bat, she just nailed the composition. I think she created a landscape that allowed us to include the wish list and more. We've got a neighborhood party that cascades out, and so with that in mind, it was time to do another draft with this template serving as the bones. We didn't want to go through 3 completely different designs again. So basically, we had like a pool of elements, the framework, and decided to take a couple approaches to see what we liked. Here was the first. And you might be wondering what's up with the people. I actually have a series of paintings that I called flower heads. They're pretty self-explanatory what those are. In this instance, I decided that concept was a good way to put forth my style, but also represent this idea of living and planting roots in your community. Now, this is still a nighttime summery scene. We've got some very cool tones going. And then here's the second. And here we've got a warmer, a bright, like a really brilliant palette. So it was at this point that we got to the critiquing. And let me tell you something, I didn't go to school for art. So the last time that I had gotten critiqued was like senior year of high school. So I was very nervous because we were presenting this to people who actually live in this neighborhood and people who are like on our arts council. And then obviously our project managers too. No, I'm not gonna go through everything they said, but here are the highlights. And I think off rip, they liked the brighter one. They like the flower heads, and they like the idea of us maintaining the native species, both in the flora and fauna. They also wanted us to make sure that they were identifiable. Overall, we didn't really have major changes to make, but we did have work to do. So we scrapped the bluer one, but still wanted to bring some design elements into it, like the maple leaves, for example, the city skyline, solar panels, and the people. We had a couple weeks to reproduce something, and this time it would go for public feedback. My main goal in this process was to incorporate the people into this design, but I found it if I just dropped the flower heads from the original one into the new one, it wouldn't be stylistically consistent, and I wanted to respect that goal that we had set in the beginning. Going off of the super colorful and surreal vibes of this piece, I designed new characters, and you can see them here. These are more flower, plant people, and I think they fit really well. Now I want to talk about something. A lot of times with public displays, when you're drawing people, it's going to be one of the most honed in on aspects, because that's where people in the public are going to identify the most. And I just had to keep that in mind. I knew that would likely draw the most critique. One thing I wanted to avoid here was coming across as like disingenuous diversity. And I'm going to break that down a bit. So have you ever seen those ads or like castings? It seems like they had like a checklist where they wanted to include a person of like every race and walk of life, and they're all holding hands. I know generally the sentiment behind that is good, but I feel like there was other ways that we could convey that message of welcoming without doing that. I think it should be subtle and natural. So I think I had a good starting place, but I'm glad we had the opportunity to go back and flesh it out more. Something you'll notice from this one is a range of ages and abilities. But I also got some criticism that I can see and resonate with. People said they look like hillbillies. Some people said they look naked. I heard it. I hear you. Now, let's take a look at the final design. And here's what's notable here. There are some subtleties that I do want to point out. I was able to give characters different hair textures while still keeping this flower people concept, and to me it's still one of my favorite parts. Like, we got dreads and a little fro over here. I adore it. And if we look over here, we have a pride flag, which I think is the only symbolism of that kind here. You know, I'm actually really glad we did it. Right now I feel like it's more important than ever that we're immovable and firm in our support for the queer community. Adding the clothes on the characters actually allowed me to make some other subtle details come out. If we look over here, I've got Indiana University colors, our two high schools rep, and as well as some Colts colors. I think the clothes also help bring out some individuality, and my absolute favorite detail in this piece is the guy on the porch swing is whistling the first few notes of Back Home Again in Indiana. Now let's go side by side, and you can see just how much this has evolved. I'd like to think that like 90% of people are happy with it, but there's always going to be some people who don't like some aspects, and that's okay. I am super proud of our artist team, and I don't have an official count, but I wouldn't doubt that we put in like 100 hours each just on paint. On that note, let's talk about that process. We each got trained to operate a scissor lift, which if you don't know what that is, it's basically a machine that just goes back and forth, up and down. It's super simple. But take a look at this slope that we were working on. Not super conducive for one of those, which I ended up learning the hard way. So we couldn't use one. And instead we got a boom lift, which is like an actual behemoth of a machine. And while we were still technically certified to operate one of those, maybe nobody wanted to do that. And so I really just want to shout out the guys that helped us with the boom lift. They also were the ones that primed the wall for us. Those guys rock. Painting was painting. The absolute hardest part of this process is that this is a brick wall. Painting in between these bricks is super meticulous. It took a lot of extra time and attention to make sure that we had things lined up correctly. If you're doing a mural yourself and you're trying to glean some information from this video and this process, I would say that spray paint will be your friend, because while it does take a while to say like tape off something or to cut out a template, it makes that process super smooth. I'm an artist that I mostly paint with markers. This was a huge learning experience for me. I got to exercise my brushwork. Okay, I've touched on a lot and I could talk about a whole lot more. If you are interested in learning more about this process and everything that went into it, leave me a comment. I read them all. And subscribe. I actually come out with another video where I break down the more monetary and contractual parts of this project. Thank you so much for watching. Cheers.